It is Y105, Dubuque's #1 hit music station. My name is Steve Pulaski. My next guest wears a lot of hats. He's a podcast host, a criminologist, a college professor, and scholar who has interacted with many of the world's most notorious serial killers. He's Dr. Scott Bonn, and he'll be bringing his research along with a Q&A session to the Five Flags Center right here in Dubuque on September 14th. First things first, how are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing just fine, and thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you for your time, man. First question, I already know it's already percolating in people's minds from that intro alone. Who are some of the serial killers with whom you've interacted, Scott?
Well, the ones that I've interacted with the most and really gotten inside their minds and developed really unique perspectives on them would include individuals like David Berkowitz, the infamous Son of Sam serial killer who terrorized New York City. Also Dennis Rader, who gave himself the narcissistic brand name Bind, Torture, Kill, BTK, in Wichita, Kansas. And also the Long Island serial killer, more recently, Rex Heuermann, diabolical sadist who terrorized Long Island for many years. And I go into quite a bit of detail and description and analysis of these individuals during the first act of my show.
Do you have a book with all your research, or where do you compile most of it?
Yeah, well, I do have a book. I would call it a true crime / pop culture book, and the title of it is Why We Love Serial Killers: the curious appeal of the world's most savage murderers. And the reason that I call it a pop culture book is that, yes, it goes very much inside the minds of these diabolical characters, explains why they do what they do, but it also looks at this true crime phenomenon and how fascinated people are by individuals like the Son of Sam and BTK, etc. So it's also a bit of a look at our society and the fascination with the dark side.
That is really incredibly fascinating, too, because even as somebody like myself who does become, enamored with the lore of crime and serial killers, I can't put my finger on, I guess, why that is. You're a scholar. You're smarter than me. Why is the public, myself included, so fascinated by serial killers, Scott?
Well, great question. It is the million-dollar question, and one of the reasons I wrote that book. But like most things in life, when you dig in and really bore down, it's actually more complex than it might seem on the surface. And there certainly are aspects of it where it's a whodunit story. It's adrenaline-pumping information and entertainment that gets us very compelled. But at a deeper psychological level, I think these individuals, they're so heinous, and the things that they do are so outrageous and just incomprehensible to most of us that it's terrifying. It's truly terrifying. These are like living monsters. And we humans, psychologically, and I'm including myself here, don't like ambiguity. We don't like not understanding something. And so I think part of the compulsion here is to understand why they do what they do, because if we can just figure it out, then maybe we can sleep better at night, and it's not so terrifying after all. So I think that has something to do with it, and I think it's particularly true for women. Interestingly, my audience, wherever I travel and wherever I speak, 75 to 80% of my audience is women. And I've talked to them directly, my audience, about that, and I think it has to do with empathy. Women are particularly drawn to the stories of other women like them. They see themselves in their shoes, that they could be the victim in these stories. And so they have that identification, and they're also looking for advice and suggestions and tools to avoid becoming the next victim of Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy, for example. And in fact, I've had women say directly to me, how do I avoid dating the next sociopath, the next psychopath? What should I be looking for? So I think this has something to do with it as well. And they also compel us, I think, to look at our own dark side. You know, we all have dark tendencies. We're not serial killers, but we all have thoughts like, oh, my boss drives me crazy, man. I could kill that SOB. But we don't do it. But these individuals do. So I think it also compels us to take a look inside and our own extreme nature and what we might be capable of under certain circumstances.
He's Dr. Scott Bonn. He's going to be at the Five Flags Center in Dubuque on September 14th. What have you discovered, Scott, are some of the commonalities between the individuals, these monsters, these murderers that you've talked to?
Well, that's really, really a good question, and you just got at a myth there. And by that, what I mean is there's this common myth that they're all the same, that they look the same, that they're all compelled by the same thing, driven by the same motivations. And often it's the stereotype of, say, the Tooth Fairy or Buffalo Bill in the Silence of the Lamb movies. And it's just not the case. Serial killers come in every shape, form, race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, IQ, you name it. But they do have a common characteristic discovered. And what that common characteristic is that for these individuals, for really unknown reasons, the killing of complete strangers serves some underlying, deep-seated psychological need, a compulsion, a fantasy, a hunger that escalates over time, over many years, and it reaches a tipping point where they simply must kill. It becomes an insatiable compulsion. And the exact nature of that psychological fantasy need varies. Sometimes it's power and control, the need to dominate and exterminate others. There is lust. Some of them are driven by sexual lust, but another myth is that they're all driven by that, and that's just not the case. Some are motivated by the need to fulfill some mission, that they decide that a particular type of individual target is unnecessary and needs to be eliminated from society. And I'm talking about things like perhaps racial, ethnic minorities, perhaps sex workers, perhaps homeless people that they, in their own pathology, decide the world doesn't need, and they decide to exterminate them. So this is just a few examples, but the common factor is this fantasy need to kill for reasons that only they understand.
Walk me through some of the meetings that you've had with these serial killers and such. Like, obviously, they had to open up to you enough that you could compile research in a book and then eventually this cross-country tour that you're on. But how did these initial interactions sort of start out? How did they evolve? Like, can you walk me through maybe one in particular, just kind of how the relationship was built?
Yeah, absolutely. As I was writing my book, and as I said, I really call it a true crime / pop culture book, and I wanted to get at the fascination of these individuals, why we're compelled to follow them and to understand them. And I realized that in order to do that, I was going to have to go to the individuals themselves. And I wanted to go to those who are the most narcissistic, who demand public attention, crave public attention, so much so that they even name themselves. So the son of Sam, he named himself, David Berkowitz. The Bind, Torture, Kill, BTK, craved publicity. He named himself. So I'll use the Dennis Rader, BTK, as the example. I went to him, and I initially wrote to him. It's actually very easy if you want to correspond with these individuals, because they all have mailing addresses in their prisons. They all have a unique prison number, identification number, and you can just write them a letter. It's as easy as that. Now, will they write back? Not necessarily, but you can write to them. And what I did, and I've done this on more than one occasion now, and it works very well, is I sort of play Clarice Starling to their Hannibal Lecter, if to use the analogy of Silence of the Lambs. Clarice Starling, the young FBI agent who contacted Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter. And I essentially played to their ego and their narcissism. I can learn from you. You have unique information that the world needs to hear about. So I fed their ego, I fed their narcissism, and in the case of Dennis Rader, he just ate it up like catnip. I mean, absolutely ate it up like catnip, and especially when he heard that I was a college professor and a PhD, he thought, oh, well, yes, you may be educated, but you need to learn from me because I'm the smartest kid in school, because he's a complete psychopath. So it worked very effectively, very, very effectively.
What is the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath?
Really, another great question. And these terms are used interchangeably and incorrectly, both by the layman and even by experts, by so-called experts in psychology and policing and FBI. And the answer is that there really is a distinction between them. They're not interchangeable. They do have common characteristics, and the common characteristic is the fact that they just both have a complete disdain for the rules of society. They just don't care. If they want to do something, they're going to do it, and nothing will stop them. They know right from wrong. They just don't care. And when they do hurt people along the way, they're essentially emotionally disconnected to other living things, so they don't feel any guilt, shame, or remorse, or pity, or even fear. Now, there are distinctions, though, and this gets to the old nature versus nurture debate. Nature, are they born that way? Nurture, are they psychologically, environmentally conditioned into predatory behavior? In other words, does the world make them the way they are? Now, here's where the distinction lies. A psychopath is a function of nature. They are born with a brain that simply is hardwired differently and functions and processes stimuli and data differently than the normal brain, and they are incapable of normal empathy, normal emotional connection. I like to use the analogy of, say, an appliance like a hairdryer. If you pull the plug out of the wall, it just doesn't work at all. Well, that's a psychopath. The empathy cord is just completely disconnected to other people, which is why they can harm people with absolutely no ill effects whatsoever. They're killing machines. Psychopaths are very rare. They're more rare than sociopaths, and sociopaths are a function of nurture. They're born with a brain that is normal and can process emotion and empathy, but these individuals tend to suffer long-term trauma, abuse, neglect, torture themselves throughout their lives, and they become environmentally conditioned into predatory, retaliatory behavior, often to protect themselves. To use the analogy once again of the hairdryer, it's as if the cord is plugged in the wall, but it's faulty, it's unreliable, it's unpredictable. You don't know how it's going to react. And as a result, sociopaths are very volatile. They have volatile personalities, mood swings, and rage. As a result, they're actually much easier to identify when you encounter one than a psychopath, because a psychopath will just seem completely emotionless, unflappable. An example of a sociopathic serial killer, some of your audience may remember the movie Monster, starring Charlize Theron. Great job playing Eileen Wuornos, the female serial killer. This is a woman who had been tormented throughout her life and later became a sex worker, and she retaliated by going after the men and killing her clients because she blamed men for her terrible life and the punishment that she received. So she would be a sociopath, a complete sociopath. So I hope that explains or helps to explain the difference between the two.
Explains it very well. Dr. Scott Bonn, you're going to be over at the Five Flags Center on September 14th. What kind of show are you bringing to Dubuque, Scott?
Yeah, well, I'm really excited. Can't wait to get there. And my show consists of two acts. Act number one is where I take the audience inside the minds of some of these diabolical individuals, providing my unique perspectives based upon my actual interactions and experiences with these individuals and their cases over time, and truly compelling, absorbing stories. And then we take a little intermission, and I come back in the second half, and the highlight of the second act of the show is a lively Q&A session where I take questions from the audience, no holds barred, ask anything you ever wanted to know about serial killers, and I'm there to answer your questions. And boy, do we have fun with that, because every night is different, every show is different based upon the audience, and I love it. And we get into sometimes localized stories depending where I am, and they want to talk about a local serial killer or general questions. But again, it proves to be a really, really lively, entertaining session.
He's Dr. Scott Bonn. He is going to be at the Five Flags Center on September 14th. Tickets for that show available at fiveflagcenter.com. I want to give you the final word, Scott. Talk about your website, maybe your book, your ongoing tour, whatever you want to promote. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. And I do have a professional website, which is docbonn.com, and that is DOCBONN.com. And at that website is a list of my full tour everywhere that I'm upcoming shows around the country for the remainder of the year and even next year. It also has a link to my book, Why We Love Serial Killers, that I mentioned before. I do a blog for Psychology Today, and there's a link to that. I do have also social media. For example, on Instagram, I am at DocBonn22, and on TikTok, I am at Real DocBonn, DocBonn, and love to hear from your audience, and look forward to seeing everyone on September 14th.
Looking forward to seeing you in Dubuque, Scott. Thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.